Hi, and welcome to this YouTube channel, Sacred Metamorphoses, and welcome to Mendy McNulty, who is my guest today. Thank you for coming, Mendy.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I want to say a few things. Oh, first, I will say, if you want to subscribe to this YouTube channel, please do. And you can also find my website, sacredmetamorphoses.com. But I'm going to introduce Mendy, and then she can introduce herself because she knows a lot more about her than I do. I met Mendy, and it's spelled Mendy. I met Mendy, it's my aging brain catching up with me, at some group journey meditation retreats. And it was probably only 3 or 4 years ago that I met you, Mendy. And I just fell in love with you. That's all I can say. And on my first YouTube conversation with someone, I kept saying, I don't want to idealize you or anything, but let me do so. So I'm gonna let Mendy again introduce herself. But one of the things I want to say is that, Mendy, there's something about just your presence. It's just your presence. And I know that's sort of spiritually led, and you are one of the most comfortable people to be around. Your energy is just pristine and pure. And I know you're a human being too, though, so that's why I'm not ideal, because I know there's other stuff in there. We all have parts.
That's right. We all have parts.
But there's something about Mendy's presence that if anyone ever wants to work with her or be with her, beautiful.
Thank you.
I've got some notes here. Her website is www.storyhouseconsulting.com, storyhouseconsulting.com, and I'll post her Instagram on the description for this YouTube video. I also will mention she's got a beautiful singing voice, which I didn't know about when I listened to her, and I appreciate that about you. And I've also watched you grow from being a participant in these group retreats, like I have been. We've been sort of peers in that, to now
Absolutely.
you have grown and have started hosting and facilitating your own group journey meditation retreats. And I've been to a couple of those, and you do a beautiful job at that. Just
Thank
beautiful. I know that Mendy and her husband, Joe, work with individuals, couples, and groups, amongst other things they do, like 4 kids. And I don't see how you do all that you do. I will say about your husband, though, besides my husband, Joe McNulty is one of the, what do I want to say, most loving, wonderful men I know.
Yeah.
And that's saying my husband and Joe. Okay.
He's pretty great.
He is pretty great. And the other thing I'll say about my background in Mendy's is that she is trained in internal family systems theory, which when I heard about that, I was like, gosh, okay, so I trained with your ancestor, who was Virginia Satir, for a month-long beach retreat in Destin, Florida in 1979.
Wow.
1979, we trained in all sorts of beautiful family systems theory and I had to come back and present to, it was Rap House back then, but it was Oasis House. I had to present a parts party to talk about how you dialogue with your parts and stuff like that. And so internal family systems sounds really cool. And I'm not going to go learn a new thing, but I think it's based in the family systems theory.
It is. It is, yeah.
I think it's the best way to see us as human beings and to live as human beings, because we all need to attend to not only our beautiful, loving parts, but our angry, sullen, melancholy parts and everything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I so agree. And that they're all positive. They all have positive intent. That's the thing. It's like there are parts that are easily villainized in our system. And most of it, all the time, they're sort of working on our behalf. I like to tell clients and myself, when I often need the reminder, that they're just running on old operating systems, kind of like our phones get. Like last night, my phone did an update. And sometimes our systems just need an update. And the more we get to know our parts, the more we learn to love them, even the ones that are kind of hard to love.
Right. Because they helped us survive. We developed them.
Oh, yeah.
Hope as little people in a big people world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when you get to embracing some of those ugly or negative parts that you've always hated or tried to put in the background, it's just a glorious new life that you lead.
Oh yeah, and you have such admiration and compassion for them. When I picture, I'm very visual. When I picture those parts kind of come into the table, the parts table, it's like they're the ones with the bruises and the warriors kind of coming off the battlefield, because they're right there in the toughest parts. These junctions of life that they show up for us, and it works. I heard in a training one time, and I couldn't even begin to know who to credit this with, but that our parts are only as severe as they have to be. So, when I have a part that shows up really big or really angry, I've been working with my own anger part recently. It's like, it's this big because it had to be that big, and it didn't just decide to be that big because it's ornery. It actually had to be that big. And that's like, oh, there automatically sparks curiosity, like, oh, I wonder what that is.
And compassion.
Oh,
And
for
thank you. I'm
sure.
grateful that you're around to help me stop that trauma, whatever it was.
Yeah, whatever it was. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We just jumped right in, Barbara.
Well, and I didn't let you introduce yourself because we're
It's okay.
our parts. And do you want to
Yeah,
explain about yourself and your history?
sure. Yeah. So I am trained in internal family systems. I've done level 2 and level 1 and consulting, or consultation work through the IFS Institute, and love that model. I'm not a therapist. I always like to put that in the big bold letters, so that those that are get that recognition. But I am an educator, so I spent most of my career life um, as a school teacher. So I worked in public schools and private schools. And my last years in education, I spent 16 years in education altogether. I worked at the college level, working with look at that precious puppy. I love it. I love it. It's
I
perfect.
don't know. She may be the star of the show, actually.
That's okay. That is always good for me.
Okay.
I worked at the college level working with students with disabilities primarily. So, and then before that, I was a minister. So an ordained minister in the Church of the Nazarene, which is a very different life than I live now. But I'm so grateful for sort of that foundation that I was able to kind of, I feel like, lift me into the way I understand the world now. Definitely different from the foundation that I was, raised in, but grateful for it for sure, because there's a deep faith and appreciation there, even though a lot of those beliefs have shifted over time. I am a mother of 4. So I have a very full life there. 4 sons, 2 dogs. We live in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, and a really full practice. So we, work, like Barbara said, I work with individuals, and we do group retreats, and I do couples work in conjunction with my husband, who is a licensed therapist here in Tennessee. And we love this work. And I do helping clients integrate big, transformative experiences with everyday life. I say my job is so cool because I get to sit at the intersection of mundane and profound. It's like I've had these big experiences, whether that's in meditation or journey work, or you've gone to a ketamine clinic, or you've gone to Peru and had ayahuasca or whatever. But now you are home and you've got to go to Costco. It's like, how do I function? How does it make a difference? And that's where I get to sit at that intersection with clients, and it's beautiful. It's a really great place to be in the world.
That's wonderful. And so that's integration work. And
Yes.
And there's a psychedelic renaissance around, as we all know, and people are using and trying psychedelics to help them find more peace, certainly with PTSD,
Yes.
stress disorder, and depression, anxiety, addictions, all sorts of things can be helped by psychedelics, although I will say they're very powerful, and that should be handled under a very structured and wonderful setting and by providers who are trained to do that work. But I will say that I'm real excited to live in this time, because things other than just rational linear approaches to our old programming, which I will say is the patriarchy. I won't say much more about that, but we were all raised here. And so we have these harsh judges in our heads, and we have overachieving judges in our heads. And we have learned to develop and evolve into as functional human beings as we can. But some people have had, and we all have had, some trauma or neglect or abuse that's gotten in our way and provoked or prompted barriers to our feeling better, living happier, more content lives. And feel free to say anything more you want to say about that, because I know you have so many people.
Well, a lot of my clients will come and they're either looking to explore psychedelic work, or they've already found a place. And obviously this isn't legal right now. So that legal disclaimer that, like you just said, with the safety, making sure you're taking all of those things into account. But for whatever reason, they're exploring it or they've already experienced it. And usually clients will say, I have been to therapy and I've sat in a therapy chair for 20 years and I can't tell this story one more time. That I hear that over and over again. And, I have had a lot, especially women clients, that will say, I feel like I'm trying to win therapy. They're like trying to be the favorite client. They're trying to like somehow get, I don't know, the therapy badge. And it's like, I got to get underneath that. And so that's where we start recognizing that parts work. It's like, oh, I wonder what part is showing up in therapy. And I want to say I'm a huge, huge supporter of therapy. And I think when you work in these altered states, that's when you can kind of start to get below some of that masking that happens in therapy. And it gets you deeper so that the therapy can be more effective. I think that really effective integration work involves working with, especially when there's trauma, and working with a licensed professional to kind of really parse out, how do I, now that we've had this big explosion and a big experience, now what? Now that I can look at the pieces. But they usually come because there's a part that's sitting in that therapy chair that's not letting them go as deep as they need to go.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd like to add that part of what I think you do is that you can be doing some integration work with a client who may be seeing another therapist for psychotherapy or mental health needs, or a psychiatrist for medications or whatever. And you are not even an adjunct, but part of the team that works with the person, not just taking over the therapist.
Not at all.
But that's not what you do.
Not at all. In fact, people come to me for a season, and they usually come while they're still working with a therapist. So a therapist, in fact, I would say 95% of my clients come by therapist referral. So a therapist will say a couple different reasons why a client might be referred by their therapist. One is the therapist themselves might not be familiar with psychedelics and aren't sure how to support their client in that. So it might just be purely that. Or they have a client that the therapist might not know about parts, or they might know about IFS or know that parts work might be helpful, but aren't really sure how to implement that particular strategy. So they may come to me to work with a particular part or a particular set of parts for a period of time in conjunction with the work that they're doing with their therapist. I kind of, I'm not an EMDR therapist, but I kind of see it in that way, where sometimes therapists might refer out for EMDR. I'm sort of often referred out for either psychedelic support, as far as how do I integrate an experience, or IFS support, specifically how do I work with a particular part, which is great. I prefer the team model. I had the really great privilege last year to speak with the MPI, and what I told them there, and I thought I probably shouldn't have said that, but I'll just say it here too, is I don't want clients in my chair for years. That they go to y'all for years. They come to me for short bursts.
That used to be my thing, the long-term deep stuff. And I, like you, I think therapy is so useful, and I had a career for 30 years of that. And I semi-retired last year, and I'm finding I've always said this though, therapy is a wonderful avenue for some people who want to partake of that. And some people, being in there for years can help build trust and find out so much more about oneself, et cetera, et cetera. However, other models, spiritual models, other psychedelic models, breath work, all sorts of other alternative practices, yoga, meditation, can also bring someone to just a loving presence and content. So if a person wanted to just contact you through your website initially without having a therapist, how would that go for you?
Yeah, so typically somebody, puts it's a real basic website. So they put a little contact form in there, and I reach out and we do just a discovery call. And then from there we kind of see what is it that you're needing. And I'm real clear about my scope. So if someone isn't working with a therapist and they're naming big traumas, or things that I realize are going to need more than what my scope is around, internal family systems practitioner or coaching, then that's where I have this great list of therapists and I say, hey, I would like you to reach out to one of these guys or someone else that you trust, and then let's partner in that. So that's usually how that works. Because I really do believe, while I believe there's no perfect way to integrate and there's not an exact model for integration by any means, there's some good kind of pillars that can be supportive, whether you're going into a spiritual experience, like psychedelics or breath work or anything like that. You never know what's going to come up and out. So whether you're preparing or all that's already come up and out is out and you're trying to figure that out. So typically if a client doesn't have a therapist that they're working with and they're presenting with a lot of big traumatic issues, then I'm going to direct them back to a therapist that, and I'm been so privileged, frankly, I feel like, I feel embraced by the therapeutic community in Nashville, especially. I mean, really, I have a lot of clients from all over, but that I have a wonderful working relationship that I have a list that I can say, hey, this is deep and wide. We can find someone that fits your needs. Yeah.
Yes. And just to say, that's a very good point. With anybody like a therapist like you, the match between the therapist or coach and the person is very important. And we don't meet all needs of all people. So
No.
I often throughout my life have said, and if I don't work for you or fit for you, let me help you find someone who can. I just think that's important because it's such a struggle anyway to explore oneself and come up with all the stuff that we come up with, to have a kind presence is really important. And some people need men and some people need women, or it seems so. And we all have different talents and skills.
Absolutely. And often I find in the role that I play in the team, you know, it falls into different, there's always the projection that comes from the client, but I have had clients that have male therapists that say, like, I sort of feel like your mom and dad, or whatever, which is always interesting to me. But I, I'll know that that's just part of the process, and release them back to their own story as that's needed. But I think it's always interesting to see how that plays, and I love working in kind of this team approach. I feel like I said, I really do feel honored by it, and honored that people trust me with their precious clients, send them my way to kind of work through some of this big stuff for sure.
Can I ask you another thing?
Please do.
You don't know about this probably yet, but I'm going to start a community called the Nashville Peace Healing Community.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have this fall 10 free gatherings actually at a church nearby my house. And you'll be invited, and everyone who's listening can be invited. But the reason I bring that up is there's something about working individually with people, and I worked with couples and individuals and did group therapy too. But there's something about the community that is also just a live, not entity, but a support system around which I've seen you work. And can you say about that from your perspective?
Yes, absolutely. I like to say, and I'm sure nothing I say is original. I just don't always know who to credit, but someone out there above my pay grade said, we're often wounded in community and we have to be healed in community. And I have experienced that as a truth, and I see it all the time. And so when I started working with individuals, I'd come out of a church background with, as much as I have done so much beautiful healing with that, originally was like, so much religious trauma, like burn it all down. I don't want anything to do with it. Don't say community to me. I don't want to be a part of that. I would say even like, don't ever anybody ask for all my eggs. I'm never putting all my eggs in one basket again. Nobody gets my full loyalty. And I still have that renegade part to a degree that's there. But what I would say is, that began to heal, and I began to find healing communities that said, hey, just as you are, really, for real, you actually don't have to change to come into this community. We actually want it all. And I had those healing experiences over and over. It was so reparative for me. So when I started working with individuals, what first happened is I was like, oh, I wish I could take you and put y'all down and have a glass of wine or have some dinner together. Because I'm not even any kind of vehicle of wisdom. You guys, your stories are and that was sort of like, man. And so when we first started doing groups, it was literally because my own selfish kind of thing of like, I really want this one to talk to this one, and I can't, ethically tell each other. So I'm just going to invite everyone and hope that they show up. And it has been one of the most beautiful honors of my life that they have showed up and they keep showing up in this beautiful little community that has begun to form over the last couple years. Is really nothing that I've done, but just simply put the call. It's like, just come on if you want to. And I just stand. We just had a retreat at the first part of August, and afterwards, Joe and I were just sitting there like, how did we get to be so lucky to be in the presence of these humans? I mean, where they're helping each other. It's like we're just sitting back, and they're just, well, let me tell you about my healing experience. Well, let me tell you, and then it's just beautiful.
Cross-pollination, and it's
Oh
beautiful.
my gosh.
And I want to say a couple things about that. One is, I think you do the one of your groups on Signal, because it's a very simple two things. And I believe all of this community work is sacred. I really do.
Yeah.
I grew up in a less rigorous church than you did, so I didn't have as much religious trauma, I think. But as I come around to this age that I am now, I realize, first of all, how many lonely people there are out there, how many depressed and anxious people there are out there. And groups are not always for the person, at least initially, because they're scared to death of being with a group. They don't want to be too intimate too fast in front of people. And I've watched some people, as you know, progress from, I'll only do individual work with you or Mendy, and now I'm anticipating or thinking about going to a group, and oh, that's scary, and that's okay. And then hopefully, and maybe it doesn't happen all the time, but hopefully they do feel embraced by the group. And then you're no longer just mother, you may be grandmother by then, and Joe's grandfather, and the community are siblings or whatever. And it's a beautiful, different kind of mix than what we can do individually.
Well, and what I love is that it takes away this model of like this, like you mentioned, like the kind of patriarchal model. And it's like, there's no, nobody gets up to the pulpit to preach and have all that. There's no guru here. Everybody is their own guru. And everyone is just sharing. It's like what I love. And honestly, what drew me to IFS is this idea of self energy, is this like, oh, it's in all of us, this kind of wisdom that, and all I ever want to be in anything I offer in a community or in couples work or in individual work, or just out there in the world as a parent or at all, is pointing people back to that internal wisdom. And what I love is when you have a room full of people that are kind of pointing back to themselves, they become just mirrors. And it's like, if I'm connecting with myself, it's easier for you to connect with yourself, and easier for you. And we're not looking for truth outside of ourselves. We're just speaking.
And we're not
truth
we're not advising each other. We're just talking about our experience, and people can learn from that and be listeners, because that's what used to happen in group therapy, is people would do all that cross talking and getting into the process of what happens in relationships. And that's beautiful and needed sometimes but otherwise just listening and being with someone who's going through their vulnerability and helping
Yes.
them to trust others is like unique and life-giving. It's
Well, and
incredible.
there's space. Yeah, there's like, oh, I get to take up as much room as I need here, um, to show up messy, like somebody, I heard somebody say one time, like we show up like a giraffe on roller skates, we're just like, and it's okay. I don't have to show up perfect. I think, for me, I have this ingrained kind of Southern woman that I need to show up. Before we started, we were talking about makeup, and I'm like, oh, there was a time when it was like makeup and heels for me. And now I'm like, I've got on deodorant and I brush my hair. It's like we've done the major.
And
And I,
because you're more at ease with and
at
comfortable with
ease with
yourself and your
myself.
body and your spirit.
And I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to show up perfectly. And I can just sort of trust the container to hold the mess. Like sometimes I'll use the analogy as a space holder. We are just simply like a bowl. When I say we, myself, any therapist, in our group work, it's myself and we have an assistant that we bring in, Wendy, and they call us the Gendies, Joe, Mindy, Wendy. So, and we're just a bowl so that you can break open and be as messy as you need to be. We're just here to hold it. We're just here to hold it. And in a group, what happens is, in the hope is, we all become the container. So, we all become the container for each other to show up, and it's not going to be perfect. And it's how we learn return and how we learn repair and how we learn healing. Joe says a lot, both in our marriage and our family and in our work, I can't promise safety, but I can always promise repair. And what he means by that is there's always going to be positive intent. I know that man, my whole life, has always only ever wanted positive intent for me, but the impact isn't always positive. Mm-hmm. So, that's what he means by safety. But it's like the power is in the return. The power is in the coming back. And that's what we learn in community. That's what we learn in group work. Is like somebody's going to show up and you're going to have a feeling about it. Mm-hmm. And in this container, we can hold that in a beautiful way, and we can come back and return. And you and I have seen that in communities that we've shared, of the power of the return. We're going to commit to coming back.
Right. And I like how you're saying that and how Joe says that. I would add just a supplement to that.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure it's a return as much as it's a new rebirth. It's almost like to allowing your parts and everybody else's to be who they are without as many projections as we put on people. And it's a different way of being than maybe ever before. Yeah. And returning to oneself and spirit, whatever people believe about spirit. And, some people aren't spiritual, and that's fine. They don't have, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's this idea of alone together. So, we all are on our own yoga mat, doing our own pose, doing our own work. But if you've ever been to a yoga class, you kind of feel the energy of the room. And you might have somebody that goes, hey, here's a bolster. Or you might look over and see somebody, oh, there's a adjust I can do. And so there's support, but we're all in our own stretch. We're all in our own flow, going through the motions to where our body allows, where our bandwidth allows, but realizing that if there's a sore spot or a tough spot that exists within me, even though I'm experiencing it within the community, I can come back to myself. So in IFS, we call that a U-turn. So we learn that U-turn in community where it's like, and when I know my parts, I can show up and go, like, I know my parts so well. When I'm in blame, I'm like, oh, we call it an IFS blended. I am blended. Somebody is driving this bus besides me, besides myself. So I can slow down, I can do a U-turn, I can return to myself and say, okay, who is in need here? Mm-hmm. Where am I missing? And then I can show up more fully in community, and I can name that. And I can say, oh, wow.
Just at all the others as the sensational stimulants that they are.
Mhm.
It may not be about them, it's about our reactions to them. And once we come back to ourselves, we don't have to blame or think, you made me crazy or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add one other thing that's
Yeah,
almost more
please.
risky than anything we've said so far, which is about touch.
Mhm.
Here in the
Yeah.
Bible Belt in Tennessee, and in my profession, I was a social worker, psychotherapist, and you're trained not to touch your clients. I never liked that idea, but I
Yeah.
also respected and knew the need for boundaries and safety. And so many people have been traumatized by touch that that's just not okay as a general rule, because you can get into trouble with that. And you can
Sure.
even reach out to hug someone who's been traumatized and scare them off. I mean, it's just crazy that we intrude in each other's space. But I will say that some of the work I've done with you and Joe and other groups and places, touch is very important,
Mhm.
especially if you do have some trust and you're in a supportive community, so that it's not, all alone or anything like that necessarily. But touch can be one of the most healing practices.
Yeah.
And again, when it's safe, when the person you're working with has some intuitive skills and some deep wisdom and learned knowledge about what kind of touch can help people sort of get over this barrier to whatever.
Mhm.
You want to say
Yeah.
anything about
Yeah, and that all comes down to really on the front end of a conversation. So if you're in a meditation retreat, and honestly, I had an IFS therapist who, in a really crucial moment, just stood up and gave me a hug. And it was like, and it was, but obviously having good conversations about consent and knowing where that person is, and even saying, is it okay if I put my hand on your arm, and then leading into that, or this, it might be helpful if, and kind of letting someone know, like grounding support on the chest is super helpful when someone is ungrounded. And I think one of the things that was profound for me, I spent most of my career working with children, and children, I had the privilege of working with really, really young children all the way up to college age. Really, really young children have no problem coming up and giving you a hug, regardless if you should hug them or not. There's just no, you just can't help it. And as they get older, you feel that rigidness. And what I found, even working with college students, um, you know, having a warm physical presence and just within yourself, and then asking a question, would it be okay if I gave you a hug? It seems like you might need that right now, or I'm feeling this. I make up a story. Sometimes I'll use that. I make up a story that a hug might feel good. Is that something that feels okay to you? And when you've built an honest relationship with the client, that they feel free to say no,
that?
and it's like, that feels good, and you have to respect your own physical boundaries in that too. So
And
I have my
separate maybe
yeah.
what we need. Like, I need a hug right now. It's not you.
Do you need a hug? Yeah.
Yeah.
And also knowing what you need, in the sense, as a practitioner, that what that client might need, I might not have available in my body. I might be a hard no in my body,
Mm-hmm.
which is also a thing. As a woman who has, in my story, I have, you know, sexual trauma. And I have just a story, coming from, I don't know, I can't speak to being raised anywhere else, but in the South, especially, go give them a hug, that kind of thing. Kind of forced physical connection. Sometimes my body says no, and the client might have a need, and then I have to listen to that. But more times than not, the more I come to healing in my body, the more I am able to read what my own parts need, and all that good stuff. But that's a little bit of an aside, but it's just something to listen to as you're kind of, what is my body naming and needing, and what does that client seem like they may need. But you mentioned loneliness, and um, when I worked with children, obviously there are a lot of lonely children, but as I started working with adults, it was profound to me, you know,
Mm-hmm.
especially coming out of COVID, how many people had skin hunger.
Absolutely.
Like, they'd go through weeks and months and are never touched by another human. Um, And so sometimes it doesn't have to be a big hug. Sometimes it can be a handshake. Sometimes it can just be, a touch on the shoulder. And if you think about, I mean, I'm a mother of four and in the thick of it right now of, parenting. And so sometimes I'm like, I don't need nobody else touch me. Nobody's allowed to touch mama for the rest of the day.
I felt like that at nights, especially working with clients and having a family. I remember thinking, nobody needs to touch me right now. I just need to be lower and,
Just need to be in a little bubble.
Yes. Yeah.
But that is not where everybody is. And it's like sometimes people just need to know that physical connection. I mean, it's how we connect to our attachment. I mean, if you think about the first, touch of a mother, that oxytocin that's released, all of that. And it's a chemical connection within us. And so that comes, I will say, a lot with building trust with a client, and not something that you approach, physical contact with, in any kind of physical contact, you approach with care and listening, deep listening.
Caution, erring on the side of caution versus, again, putting our needs on someone else that we're just projecting.
And our projections. Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to end in a moment. So I want to ask just a more general question, because I could talk to you for hours and hours and days. So if you think about the word healing, which I never really liked that word, because I thought, I don't know, people call themselves healers and they were more like gurus and things like that. But
yeah,
I do buy that term these days. So in terms of healing, what would you say, just some words about how you think generally or specifically people heal? Do you have any images or ideas that we can just share with others about that?
Yeah, I say that everything we ever needed to know we could learn on the Wizard of Oz. And like, we have everything we need. We often, for one reason or another, there are layers that we can't see it, or we're lost in a story that we're unable to see that we actually have what we need to go where we want to go and to go home, to be healed. And all I ever want to be is actually not anybody's healer, but my own. And I really believe that we can't be anyone's healer but our own. And if, that to me is the most powerful message, is like, you had it all along, Dorothy. You had it all along. And my job, my hope is that this is sort of silly, but like a big foam finger, like pointing you back to yourself, like you see at the ball game, like number one, just like that, pointing back to you. I don't even need people to remember my name if they can remember their own, their wisdom, their inner guidance. And that's where you should start on any journey, frankly, at all.
And we as facilitators or coaches can do our best to help build that trust and to help facilitate growth, maybe. And it is not about us. It's about our using the tools we have, or the knowledge or wisdom or intuition we have about what people need, but they're the ones that do their own healing. So I'm glad
100%.
you brought it up that way. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I wonder, anything else you want to say and or share about your practice, your work, anything else?
Yeah. So I will have, you mentioned the community. In the next month, we're going to be launching, we have an in-person community that's our Story House community. And then we're going to be launching an online community for integration, that's going to be available. There'll be information about that on my Instagram page, which is self-led integration. And there's also a course that we'll be launching called Gentle Journeys Inward, which is just integrating or preparing for big experiences. So that will be available hopefully this fall. And yeah, we would love to have you a part of that community. That's an integration is the key when you have any kind of big spiritual experience.
Yes, and I think that's
Yeah.
transformation is what my term Sacred Metamorphoses is about. It's all about transmuting and transforming what we've got here as humans. Some people will say we're humans with spirit and divine
Yeah.
in us. And we have to manage our daily lives as humans, though. And that's a big trick sometimes.
Yeah. Like I say, you got to go to Costco. Like, we got to manage this life.
Yes, we do. And we do. And so these journeys or these meditations are not all about, they're never about escape, actually, never about escape, but going inward and experiencing more fully whatever is there and comes to you. Because I do believe there are energies all around us. Some people don't, and that's fine. But I've really enjoyed talking to you
I
today.
know. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, and
Thank
I'll,
you for having me.
yes, and we'll follow up with each other soon. And
Yes.
I recommend Mendy and Joe McNulty highly to
And
everyone.
I know this YouTube channel is just going to do amazing. I'm so excited to see this metamorphosis of you happening.
Oh, great too. I love talking to people, so this
Yeah.
works. All right.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mendy.
Barbara.
Bye-bye.